Hey there, Professor Zeeb here. Welcome to another lecture. This time we're going to talk about infants, and more specifically, we're going to look at infants' sensation and perception. Okay, so we're going to cover some different aspects of that. Really we're going to focus more on the sensation sort of aspect of it, but definitely we'll be talking some perception as well. Okay, so we know that babies are active seekers of stimulation. And of course, one of the ways they do that or obtain that is through their senses, right? They hear things, they see things, they feel things, and we really think that that helps to stimulate their cognitive development. So in other words, we want to encourage parents as much as possible to read to their child, to talk to them, play music, hold them, show them, books and pictures and colors and things like that, because we have definitely noticed that that stimulates the brain and it stimulates their developmental progress. So that's definitely encouraging news. And now we're going to look at more specifically the senses themselves. So as we share our screen here and pull up the slides. Okay, so whoops, we went a little bit too far here. So we're going to start off with infant sensation and perception, and we're going to go through some of the different senses. All right, so we're going to talk about vision first of all. We know that babies definitely can see when they are born, okay? So the point we're going to make here is that infants can see at birth. That is definitely possible. However, that vision is immature as we know it as an adult. So for example, you've heard of people's vision being 20/20, which would be normal vision for a person. We think at birth it's probably around 2600, so probably blurry, very immature. But by 6 months, we have discovered it goes to 20/40. So definitely some leaps and gains are obtained during this time, where infants acquire vision pretty rapidly as they progress through development. We know that certainly infants can see because they track things with their eyes right from day one. Remember, we think that the vision is probably blurred and immature, but certainly will develop rapidly. So for example, we know that color perception typically emerges around 2 to 4 months into life, especially bright sort of colors. They're even able to discern colors at 4 to 8 weeks. So wow, that's pretty impressive that they're able to do that. Research has also shown that they prefer to look at bluer colors, bluer hues compared to yellows. They even have a preference and are able to tell the difference between different colors. In terms of depth perception, we think that that probably emerges around 4 to 5 months. So it's been theorized. But certainly they can use depth cues as early as 3 to 4 months. So vision and depth perception definitely is going to be moving right along early on, as you can see. So we're going to look at a study that shows that not only can infants see, but they also prefer to look at things that adults do. So in this study, and by the way, this goes way back to the 60s. It has been documented obviously since then. This study is from France 63, where they are working with infants who are 2 days old. So imagine a 2-day-old baby in an experiment here. And they would show them different objects one at a time and record how long they would stare at them. So theoretically, if they're more interested in something, they would look at it longer compared to look at it and then quickly look away. So here we have our different objects here. We have a face, concentric circles, different colors and so forth. So they found the number one item that they showed them was a face, or as you can see here on the graph, babies preferred to look at that longer. So potentially they were being stimulated by looking at the face. And what, basically what this means is that babies love to look at stimulating type objects rather than boring type stuff. So you can see the differences here in the objects. So that's probably one of the reasons why baby toys are so stimulating in nature, because we know that captivates their attention, it grabs their attention, and we know that's definitely good for their development to kind of get them going, if you would. All right, so in the first, just to kind of summarize that, in the first few years, we would expect infants to discern patterns, to have depth in their vision, orientation, location, movement, color, all of that sort of comes into being during infancy. And a lot of it, as we said, happens very early on. All right, so the next area we're going to look at is called visual occlusion. So some of you may not know what this means, but visual occlusion, just like we see in the photograph here, when you're looking at something and there's objects in the foreground and the background, so as we're looking at this majestic scene here, and we have trees that are blocking the view, unfortunately, occlusion is where objects are blocking something in the background, but you're also able to, so in other words, it's partially hidden is what we mean. And obviously, as an experienced visual learner, we know that there is something behind that. So for example, as I'm looking at this on the right here, even though this tree is blocking this mountain, I can still imagine and picture that the mountain, the skyline and the line of the mountain itself is there, and I can know that it's there through my visual experience. So that's kind of what we mean. Adults, and experienced learners are able to do that very easily. We know what's behind something. We can put it together cognitively, visually, that something is behind that object. Okay, so with infants, we're seeing a little bit, some differences here. In the first few months is what we mean by that. So in the first few months, occluded objects are not perceived as complete according to these studies. So in other words, when they're looking at something like that scene we showed before, we could even go back here. Rather than seeing a mountain behind the trees as we normally would, it may be that there's sort of, they're looking at all the different pictures individually. So they're not sort of imagining that something's behind there. In other words, they're sort of only able to see what's visible. In terms of this picture, we see parts of the mountain and the tree, but as we said before, we can imagine that there's a mountain behind that tree and sort of picture it in our mind and so forth. So the point is that young infants are unable to do that. We have found that possibly due to lack of experience, lack of cognitive skills, if you would, they're unable to show that experience or show that ability. Okay, switching gears, next we go to hearing. I love this picture, as the infants getting their hearing tested. I just thought that was a funny photo, so I kind of included that there. We know that infants, certainly fetuses, can hear prenatally, and even once they're born, can tell the direction of sound. So we have evidence that fetuses can hear in the womb. So we know that is actually possible. That takes place before the actual birth. But we also know that young babies, when they're born, will react in the direction of a sound. So in other words, if we play different sounds in different locations around them, they're able to kind of tell where that sound is coming from. So we determine that happens very early on. In fact, that was actually proven in the 1960s that children as early as 10 months of age, 10 minutes, brand new baby, were able to tell the directions of those sounds. We've also discovered that infants are able to develop the loudness of a sound and determine pitch. We think that the softer sounds are harder to hear early on in infancy, but certainly down the line, we find that obviously they're going to catch up. So hearing is there. There are some limitations, of course. Some other studies are showing that they prefer higher pitched sounds compared to lower pitched sounds, and also even may prefer their own mother's voice compared to other women. Well, that would make sense. If they can hear in the womb, they're probably used to hearing mom's voice, obviously very often, and become familiar with the vocal patterns of mom. And so that would sort of explain why they would do that. Once again, it's just more evidence that they can hear in the womb. All right, let's look at some other senses. Next, we're going to go to smell. So we know that infants can differentiate among odors. So even this young, they're able to do that. So for example, and by the way, we're talking newborns in this case. So research has shown that babies prefer the odor of breast milk over formula, because obviously there's those two options. We've been talking about that. So I thought that was interesting that babies prefer the smell of breast milk compared to formula. They also prefer the scent of their own mother. So they're able to know what mom smells like and prefer that odor to other odors, okay? Taste, we know that infants certainly can taste, and we even think that taste develops in the womb. So it may start to develop in the womb. And so part of the evidence of that is we've observed fetuses swallowing the amniotic fluid. I know it's kind of gross to think about, but from a biological, natural standpoint, it is golden. So we know that fetuses actually swallow amniotic fluid, and that helps to develop digestion and may be involved with taste buds. But we've also seen studies or shown studies that as babies are getting closer to being born in the womb, that they would swallow the amniotic fluid more when they've introduced a saccharin type flavor. So in other words, it's almost like they can taste that compared to when it doesn't have it, and they would prefer that. So I thought that was very interesting. So we certainly think that the sense of taste develops in the womb. All right, touch. No question that infants can feel things with their skin. In fact, some of our mothers out there may have experienced that when your baby was born, they may have put the baby on your chest, what they call skin-to-skin contact. I love that. So they get the warmth, they get the feeling of that. And we know that babies love that. In fact, we have found that the sense of touch soothes babies. So that's probably one of the reasons they do that. But we also know that babies can experience pain. They actually can feel pain, which comes from receptors in your skin, part of the whole sense of touch, if you would, the somatosensory system. We know that babies can feel pain. And certainly this has been confirmed in studies where the baby was going through some kind of medical procedure. For example, they often get a blood test through a heel prick, and they've discovered that physiologically, behaviorally, and even their brain activity showed a reaction to being pricked. So therefore, it certainly is classic evidence, or overwhelming evidence, I should say, that infants can certainly feel things through their skin, certainly when they're born. Okay, and keep in mind, like other senses, this is one of the ways that babies learn about the world is by feeling things, and of course, all the other senses as we've mentioned. Okay, well, that will kind of wrap up this short, quick lecture on an infant's sensory experience and somewhat of perception. I hope you guys are enjoying the course. Please move on to the next step in the class.